New on Curiosity Stream. How do you connect a 16th century potato to limitless energy production? Could Napoleon's toothpick have a direct link to a machine that predicts the future? And how can a 1700s conch shell chart a course to humans connecting their brains to the internet? James Burke's visionary series Connections returns for a new generation. Experience all new Connections. With monthly, annual, and bundled plans, find the one that works for you at curiositystream.com.
When I started to get up in the car, Mrs. Kennedy came up in the trunk. She was trying to grab some of that material that had erupted out of the president's head, and she managed to get some of it in her hand. I grabbed her and put her in the back seat. When I did that, the president's body fell to his left into her lap. The right side of his face was up. I could see his eyes were fixed. There's a hole in the skull. I could see in that hole there was no brain matter left. It had all been blown out.
My name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? Welcome back to another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH, the podcast where we try to find out how things happen. We take things and get down to their very core, their very foundation, and try to figure out what made them occur. This is episode 79. I am your host, Richard Dix. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. If it's not, welcome. Thank you guys always for coming back, press and play. People that do come, I appreciate it. We're going to talk about JFK today. We're going to get down to it. We're going to get into the weeds of who may have done it. Was that person alone? Who was sponsoring said activities? Who knows? We're going to find out. But before we get there, we have a little bit of housekeeping to do, as is customary with this podcast. Normally I say what I've been watching. Let's see, what have I been watching recently? I've been watching a couple movies. I just watched Dr. Sleep. This is, of course, the sequel to The Shining. I read the book when it came out, it's been almost 10 years now, maybe 8 years ago. No, before that, maybe about 10 years ago. When the book came out, the Dr. Sleep, which is the sequel to The Shining. If you have not seen The Shining, you definitely want to check it out. It is peak Nicholson. It is, I love Jack Nicholson. It is, here's Johnny. But this is the life of the kid who was in the first movie, and so he grows up. He continues to have mind powers, kind of controlling things with his brain over there, and he finds a little girl who has the same powers, but she's like super duper stronger in her powers. And there's a lot more to that. But I mean, if you like the first movie, you may not like the second one, because it's such a crazy sequel. Because how many times do you have a sequel that, I don't know, gets made 30 years after the original movie? But it's Stephen King, so, it's worth checking out at least a little bit. But what am I listening to? I just listened to Stephen A. Smith's book, Straight Shooter. I listened to it on audiobook as I was on the way to Baltimore to see the Orioles take on my Cardinals. And I must say, while I was there, we won 5-2. But if you watch our record, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, so on the way, I was listening to Stephen A. Smith's book, Straight Shooter. It was a very good book. I am a fan. Have been a fan for a long time, even since before First Take, even back when he would do those little guest spots on ESPN, like from the actual office of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Even back then, when nobody really knew who he was, and you could tell. I mean, you just to see his glow up has been remarkable. But it was interesting to hear about his life and the upbringing that he had. And I would say he keeps it pretty real, or I mean, who really does keep it real these days? I could say at the very least, he has some pretty interesting stories. I don't know if they're real or not, but they kept my attention for 4 hours. Where I was locked in a car where I couldn't get out, so I could say something. But all I say is always, if I can plug or talk about those things, I can tell you about Bite Size Bios, which is the Minnesota accompaniment to this podcast. Coming up on our 1-year anniversary of the Bite Size Bio introduction. I believe it was last October, the first Bite Size Bio. This most recent one was about Benito Mussolini, and we learned about his life. We learned why people hate him. That was a big thing. I was wondering. I didn't know. I mean, I had an idea. I had a general idea, but we run it down. And if you didn't know and you're looking for somebody to hate, listen to Bite Size Bio number 38. Wow, that rhymed. And true. It's true. Check it out. But yeah, we learned that he was into violence, sex, and fascism, which is enough to maybe, not like somebody. among other things. And yeah, like I said, we're coming up on 40 eps for BSB, which is pretty cool. Every other Monday at 4:30 a.m. Definitely give it a listen. So like and subscribe wherever you hear this. It definitely helps the pod grow. Give us 5 stars if you liked it, 2 stars if you didn't. Tell us why you didn't like it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. Always trying to hear, the different ways we could possibly be better. But yeah, so that's pretty much it before we get to JFK, before we get down to it and find out not why, but how. We're going to find out how did our sitting president die in 1963. So yeah, before I get too deep in the just saying nothingville, yeah, we'll go ahead and get out of here and get you to JFK. So without further ado, as we know what to do, here is the episode.
Friday, 10 minutes before noon. The motorcade begins the 11-mile ride to the Dallas Trade Mart, where the president is to deliver a major address. Governor and Mrs. Connolly ride in the presidential limousine. In a downtown building, a gunman waits at a 6th-floor window, a high-powered rifle by his side.
4 times in our nation's history, a president was assassinated. A few other times, they were injured, but not killed. And I have what I don't know is an exhaustive list, but definitely a list of some of those guys. So Andrew Jackson, he was the first one. He was the first president to have an assassination attempt. He was never actually shot, and he didn't die. But what happened was this guy rolled up on him, and he had 2 guns, and neither one of them worked. Both of them misfired, and then they arrested him, from what I understand. I have it here. And then but this guy was probably crazy. His name was, I believe, Richard Lawrence. Yeah, Richard Lawrence. Like I said, he had 2 guns. This guy, but he was basically, and when I read the thing about him, this was interesting to me. He had kind of come in and out of his family's life for the few months prior to when this happened. He was from England, but he had settled in Virginia, and he was a house painter. And he was actually going to leave house painting to go learn to paint landscapes, to which I thought, this is a total tangent, but I was like, how many house painters are legitimate artists, artistes? You know what I mean? Like how many Jean Baptiste we got at Sherwin-Williams? I'm wondering, but I don't know. But go back to our man Richard Lawrence. He ended up going crazy. He was talking about how the government. He said he was going to go to England, and he came back having not gone to England, and told his family the government didn't want him to go to England. And this was in 1835, 1832 is the other thing when he said this. But the fact that we had people 200 plus years ago that are already conspiracy theorying the government. I thought that was I didn't even know that was. I thought that was a recent development. It's been around since the wheel, evidently. But yeah, so I just wanted to cover the first couple guys before we get into old JFK. Just tell you, about the idea. How we do on this podcast. We go back before we go forward. So we're going to talk about the presidents that were killed before him. Not too much before we go ahead and skip over to him. Let's see. So we talked about Andrew Jackson and the failed attempt on his life. Of course, everyone knows Abraham Lincoln. He was killed. Shot in the Ford Theater, I do believe, by John Wilkes Booth. James A. Garfield, he was the 20th president. He was killed in 1881. This is the wild one, because dude could have lived. Dude could have totally lived. He was shot. This dude, because he lived. Actually, was true. He lived for I think the next 3 months after he was shot. 79 days. He was shot on July the 2nd, 1881, in D.C. At the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station. Charles Guiteau, I guess Gitto, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but he shot him twice with what they call a 442 Webley British Bulldog. That's a pretty cool name for a gun, if I've ever heard one. But yeah, dude got shot a couple times, and I don't know. He lived. But then what really got him? This is the crazy part. He basically just died from medical malpractice. He basically died because his doctors were disgusting. They were just they kept going back into his wounds and stuff with their nasty little hands and instruments that were unsterilized. And they basically they gave him a bunch of infections because of that. So it's this guy lived. He died in September. He was shot in July. So for a while, he was still just the president. Our president got shot, and then we just lived in a world where our president got shot as if it were the 80s. But then because his doctor just kept going back up in his little wounds and stuff, he ended up dying. I thought that was pretty, like, one of the wildest of all of these, because most of the rest of these guys, they just get shot, or, you know what I mean, they get shot and they die. That guy got shot and then had a pretty good chance to live, but his doctors were just like not following, and I'm not even sure what was considered what the protocol of modern medicine was at that time, but you'd have to think. I mean, I don't know. Wash your hands? I don't know. But yeah, William McKinley, he was shot literally 20 years later, in 1901, in Buffalo, of all places, at the Temple of Music in Buffalo, New York. Maybe that's where I die. I don't know. But yeah, he got shot. He got shot a couple times, and then the group around jumped on the guy that shot him, James Benjamin Parker. He shot McKinley, and then that guy got beat up by the police so bad they almost killed him. So bad they were like, maybe this guy won't even make it to like court, but he did, and then they killed him. So he died pretty soon after. Death row back then was no joke. This man got sentenced in September. He got the electric chair in October. I mean, before Halloween, they got this guy. He didn't even get one last Christmas, or even a turkey on Thanksgiving. But yeah, JFK would be the last one, the most recent president to actually be shot and killed. There have been multiple other wounded presidents. Ronald Reagan, of course, was shot, was what I was referencing to with the 80s comment earlier. And Theodore Roosevelt is the other one. He was shot as well. And I think I covered this, or just mentioned it in a previous pod, that he got shot and he was like, yo, I just got shot. You know what I mean? Like, Teddy Roosevelt was a tough dude. He did not take any stuff, man. They just left the bullet there, and it was with him for the rest of his life. And also, I think I'll mention in the next bite-sized bios that we're doing, he walked Eleanor Roosevelt down the aisle to marry FDR. It was the whole Roosevelt affair. That's weird. But moving on, I think we are now gonna get to, let's see, any other president. Well, turns out a few of them. Let's see what Gerald Ford. These are attempts. Let's see. But yeah, well, you can go on for that. I mean, you can go on for days for that. By the fall of 1963, JFK and his political advisors were preparing for the next presidential campaign, trying to get reelected. Although he had not formally announced his candidacy, it was clear that he was going to run again, and he seemed confident. He seemed confident about his chances for reelection. So he started to embark on this large kind of trip, to kind of show people that to make people like him is what I got from it when I was watching the videos. Because even I don't know if we have the audio for that specific one where Clint Hill's talking about the fact that they were told to keep away from them more than normal, which I don't think would have made a difference. But the bullet's a bullet. But they were specifically, the Secret Service was told to kind of hang back to make them look more personable, to make them seem a little more everyday, to appeal to Joe Smo in the Midwest or whatever, or in Texas. So before he had actually gone down to Texas, he had gone on a long trip. I think they said 9 states in less than a week. So he was really out there. And then but he knew he would need to go to Texas to kind of convince the people to vote for him, I guess, because he knew there was going to be some discontent in that state specifically. He had even said so in some gatherings in Boston and Philadelphia a few weeks prior to his trip. He had told them, specifically he needed to win in Florida and Texas, and told him that he had planned to go. And so on November the 21st, the president and his first lady departed on Air Force One for the 2-day 5-city tour of Texas. President Kennedy was aware that a feud among party leaders in Texas could jeopardize his chances of carrying the state in 1964, kind of what I was talking about earlier, and one of his aims for the trip was to bring Democrats together. He also knew that a relatively small but vocal group of extremists was contributing to the political tensions in Texas and would likely make its presence felt, especially in Dallas, where the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Adlai Stevenson, had been physically attacked a month earlier after making a speech there. So those guys were having none of it. They meant business. Nonetheless, JFK seemed to relish the prospect of leaving Washington, getting out of the Beltway, and getting among some people, and into the political fray. I don't believe that. I'm just, I'm reading these notes that I have here. I just don't. I look at that guy and I think he doesn't. I'm just, I don't know, man. He doesn't look like he welcomes confrontation. I'll just be honest. I don't know if it's I don't know. That's just my thought. That's just my opinion. So that was November 21st of 1963. We will now get to, drum roll please. Well, I hope he did it. But November 22nd, 1963, which is Assassination Day. I don't think anybody calls it that, but it makes it sound a little bit brighter. Like, oh, it's Assassination Day, you know? Like, oh, like Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Assassination Day. But yeah, so November 22nd, 1963, a light rain was falling on that Friday morning in Fort Worth, Texas, but a crowd of several thousand stood in the parking lot outside the Texas hotel where the Kennedys had spent the night.
Okay, round two. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
A platform was set up, and the president, wearing no protection against the weather, came out to make some brief remarks.
Senator Yarborough, Mr. Baca, ladies and gentlemen, there are no faint hearts in Fort Worth, and I appreciate your being here this morning. Mrs. Kennedy is organizing herself. It takes longer. But of course she looks better than we do when she does it. But we appreciate your welcome. This city's been a great western city. The defense of the West, cattle, oil, and all the rest. It has believed in strength in this city, and strength in this state, and strength in this country.
Back inside the hotel, the president spoke at a breakfast of the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce, focusing on military preparedness. Now, I don't have this in my notes, but I do think I remember because I've read multiple books about this specific. I was one of those guys who was like too into JFK's assassination at one point in my life, and I think it was called 5 Days in November. I think was the book. I think was what it was called. But it talked about Jackie O's dress in at this luncheon, which would eventually be also what she would wear when he was shot, as the pink. The pink pillbox, and how it was a big to do over whether or not she should wear it or not. But even before this, had nothing to do with obviously the assassination. But I don't know. I just thought that was interesting to put in there. But yeah, so after that speech we just heard, he would go back inside, talk for a little bit more of the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce, and then on to Dallas. So the presidential party left the hotel and went by the motorcade to Carswell Air Force Base for the 13-minute flight to Dallas. Arriving at Love Field, President and Mrs. Kennedy disembarked and immediately walked toward a fence where a crowd of well-wishers had gathered, and they spent several minutes shaking hands. Governor John Connally and his wife, Nellie, were already seated in the open convertible as the Kennedys entered and sat behind them. And they took the bubble top off because it was no longer raining. I guess it had been, but yeah, it was before, I guess, in the morning, like we said, but they are no longer raining. But I guess they're in a different place now. They're in Dallas, so that weather shouldn't matter. Not that far, I guess. The procession left the airport and traveled along a 10-mile route that wound through downtown Dallas, and on the way to the Trade Mart, which was where he was supposed to speak later that day, if his head had not gotten blown off. Now let's get to the assassination. So what's going to happen? I'm going to tell you just basically what happened, and then we're going to dig into just all the little juicy little morsels of this event in the different ways that people see. Because if you're wondering, if you're hearing this, you're like, oh, I know what happened, I've heard this. Okay, yeah, you might have heard this, and you may have even heard what we talk about later. But I think there's always, it's interesting to rehash these things, because especially when there's something this foggy, is the best way, the kind of adjective that I can put to the situation. It's like you can look at other assassinations and none of them were this just odd, or and they even said after all those assassinations, there was the same conspiracy theories, even Andrew Jackson, who was not even shot, had a conspiracy theory about who had him assassinated. He said it was a couple different senators. Senator Calhoun, I think he's one of the people he specifically said, and some dude from Mississippi. But yeah, so like there's always been conspiracy theories around assassinations, but this one seems to be so ripe for it. I mean, there's so many people who just openly say that the CIA killed JFK. There's so many people who subscribe to that theory. I think that I'm one. I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know. I think it's very possible. I think it's very possible that they did. You'd have to. I mean, and for I would say because that was their MO in other countries. You know what I mean? Like the CIA and probably is, not even was, very versed in toppling a regime. When we've covered a couple of them, I think, on this pod, you go for the leader, and the CIA has also been in control of. I always feel like the CIA is almost the people who really control America. Like, like the FBI polices America, and then is like the real like law enforcement arm. But to me, and all the other alphabet boys, DEA, ATF, all that stuff, I feel like they're cops until you get to CIA. Those dudes feel like, I mean, James Bond is a very watered down comparison, I think, to what they actually are. And that's, they're the ones. I mean, it's what it's been proven. All the different stuff they've done. MK Ultra, introducing crack in the 80s. I mean, things that are documented. That's what makes this, makes me be like, well, you really can't put much past these guys. You really can't. But so yeah, the assassination. Crowds of excited people line the streets and wave to the Kennedys. The car turned off Main Street at Dealey Plaza around 12:30 p.m. As it was passing the Texas School Book Depository, gunfire suddenly reverberated in the plaza. Right before this, Nellie Connolly, who was the wife of the governor, turned and commented to Kennedy, who was sitting right behind her, Mr. President, they can't make you believe now that there are not some in Dallas who love and appreciate you, can they? In his last words, which I have here in bold in my notes, no, they sure can't.
And we had turned down on Elm Street, maybe 150 feet. And as I was scanning to my left, I heard this explosive noise from the rear over my right shoulder. Now, I didn't recognize it as a gunshot initially, so I started to turn toward that noise, and I only got as far as the back of the president's car because I saw the president's reaction, and that's when I realized it had been a gunshot.
And that voice, of course, belongs to former Secret Service agent Clint Hill, who is the guy made famous in the pictures and videos as the guy who climbs on the back of the limo, the limousine. I pronounced the limo really weird just then, but he climbs on the back. He's that guy. He's the person who's helping helping Jackie O get JFK's brains off the back because she which I think in that scene, which is not, I mean, it's a scene, but it's reality. But I said that it's like a scene from a movie, but it's so real. It happened. I feel like that's what I would do. When if you're with somebody, especially someone you love, so it's even more, it's heightened because of the emotions that are involved. But you see their head just in that moment get blown, like you just watch like their piece of their forehead just go 3 or 4 feet to the other, and your first instinct has got to be, because I thought about it, I was like, you need that. Like I would, you know what I mean? Like it seems so wild. Like why would she? Like what are you gonna like? I don't know. Like you know what I mean? She gets out and gets his dude's like brain and skull. It's like if you're digging up brains and skull, most likely there's nothing you can do. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but that seems kind of true. But when I saw that, it was such a visceral. I had such a visceral reaction to it internally because I felt like I would definitely do that. But yeah, so that's Clint Hill that we hear there. I'm gonna go back to him for a little bit more because he can just say stuff that I just couldn't. That I feel like is just is pertinent and poignant at this moment.
Grabbed at his throat, and he started to fall to his left. He had a back brace on, which prevented him from really bending much forward, but also immediately in front of him was seated Governor Connolly in a jump seat, and the back of that jump seat was almost up against the knees of President Kennedy. So he started to fall to his left, and when I then realized this was a gunshot, so I jumped from my position and I ran toward the presidential car with the intent of getting up on top of the back to provide a shield there for President and Mrs. Kennedy.
The Warren Commission concluded that 3 shots were fired and noted that most witnesses recalled that the second and third shots were bunched together. Shortly after Kennedy began waving, some witnesses heard the first gunshot, but few in the crowd or motorcade reacted, many interpreting the sound as a firecracker or a backfire from a vehicle. Within 1 second of each other, Governor Connally and Mrs. Kennedy turned abruptly from their left to their right. Connally, an experienced hunter, immediately recognized the sound as that of a rifle and turned his head and torso rightward, noting nothing unusual behind him. He testified that he could not see Kennedy, so he started to turn forward again, and it was at that moment when his head was facing about 20 degrees left of center, he was hit in the upper right back by a shot that he did not hear. And he was quoted as saying that he was screamed and yelled, "My God, they're going to kill us all," end quote. Now, this is important because there's what's called the magic bullet theory, which has been, I think, the prevailing idea of how things happened that day. According to the Warren Commission and the HSCA, Kennedy was waving to the crowds on his right when a shot entered his upper back and exited his throat just beneath his larynx. He raised his elbows and clenched his fists in front of his face and neck, which the video is there, and you can see it. You can see all this happening. The question is, how many bullets did it take to make this happen? Then he leaned forward and leftward to Mrs. Kennedy, facing him, put her arms around him. Although this by itself was a very serious wound, it likely would have been survivable. According to the Warren Commission's single bullet theory, which is, like I said, been derided as the magic bullet theory by conspiracy theorists, Governor Connally was injured by the same bullet that exited Kennedy's neck. So this bullet was doing a lot of work. This bullet was working overtime. The bullet created an oval-shaped entry wound, struck and destroyed several inches of Connally's right fifth rib, and exited his chest just below his right nipple. It was said that that same bullet entered his arm just above his right wrist and shattered his right radius bone. The bullet then exited just below the wrist at the inner side of his right palm, once again over time, and finally lodged in his left thigh. Now, we're going to come back to that later on, but that's where it's at. As the limousine passed the grassy knoll, Kennedy was struck a second time by the fatal shot to the head. This is what I said, put his brains and skull in the back of that limousine. The Warren Commission made no conclusion as to whether this was the second or third bullet fired, because I don't think the Warren Commission really knows that much of anything. Both committees concluded that the second shot to strike Kennedy entered the rear of his head. It then passed in fragments through his skull, creating a large, roughly ovular hole on the rear right side of the head, spraying blood and fragments. His brain and blood spatter landed as far as the following Secret Service car and the motorcycle officers. I did not know that. That's wild. So, his blood from that shot was on the car behind them.
They realized almost instantly that nothing they could do. They didn't even turn the president's body over. They only looked at him from the front. They didn't realize that there were 2 gunshot holes in the back. One at about the neck level. That was the entrance point, and it exited where the necktie is, the knot, and it had nicked the knot. And the other one low in the back of the head that had exited above the ear. The one above the ear is the one that they saw immediately. No brain matter there. His eyes was fixed. There was he was breathing a little bit at the time that we got him into the emergency room. I guess it was just an involuntary situation, but that didn't last long, and there was no blood pressure and nothing.
The scene being recounted there is once again former Secret Service agent Clint Hill, who's describing the doctors at Parkland Memorial Hospital, which is, of course, where they took JFK and Governor Connally, which I think it gets glossed over because I don't know. It was, you forget that somebody else got shot that day. The guy lived, which I guess why he gets left out of the story, but he was shot up pretty bad. He would end up dying I think 40 years later. But I think it was either the 70s or the 90s. I can't quite remember. I'm not going to look it up because I don't think it's pertinent to what we're doing here. But so they're at Parkland. A Catholic priest was summoned to administer the last rites at around 1 p.m. JFK was pronounced dead, though seriously wounded. Like I said, Governor Connally would recover and survive. The president's body was brought to Love Field. I always thought that was an interesting just little fact that his dead body was brought to a field called Love after an assassination. And he was placed on Air Force One. Before the plane took off, a grim-faced Lyndon B. Johnson stood in the tight, crowded compartment and took the oath of office, administered by U.S. District Court Judge Sarah Hughes. The brief ceremony took place at 2:38 p.m. This news would hit the airwaves like a sack of bricks. It would just, as you can imagine, where you have to tell the world that the president has been shot, which is, new, I would think, I would say for humanity. All the rest of the assassinations had to be reported by like newspaper or like telegrams or something like that, or even like a phone call. This was done over the television, like I said, people were just watching TV and they just butted in. And I have a little clip of kind of what it was like. If you can take yourself to a Friday afternoon around 2:00, November 22nd, 1963.
Put the hood on and off with the zipper than it is with the snaps. Then there's zippers up the side so that the jacket will fit tightly around the hips, keeping that straight, sleek look that it should have. And very often you'll find a zipper hidden in the arm.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You'll excuse the fact that I'm out of breath, but about 10 or 15 minutes ago, a tragic thing, from all indications at this point, has happened in the city of Dallas. Let me quote to you this. And you'll excuse me if I am out of breath. A bulletin. This is from the United Press from Dallas. President Kennedy and Governor John Connally have been cut down by assassins' bullets in downtown Dallas. They were riding in an open automobile when the shots were fired. The president, his limp body carried in the arms of his wife, Jacqueline, has rushed to Parkland Hospital. And if you'll excuse me if I give some directions and we talk about what we're going to do here for the next few minutes, but Bobby, let's tape this, if you please, particularly the interview with the eyewitness people.
It had to have been absolute mayhem. Could you imagine, just imagine right now, if you're doing whatever you're doing, some bulletin, some Amber Alert pops up on your phone that says President Biden's been shot and killed. Like, it's definitely going to be like a large part of your day. If it's not, I don't know, but it would definitely be for me. We'd be talking about it non-stop. So that's kind of, I wanted to give you like the, because when I saw that, I thought, oh, this is really cool. Because this is what you don't see. That we know about it, or at least for me and people of my age, maybe even a little bit older, because this happened, 60 years ago? Yeah. 60 years ago. But it had,
With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Okay, round two. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry. We were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right. ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
I read about it. I read about it. I watch documentaries about it. But this really shows what it was like to just be like, that was a thing that they were talking about a coat. She was talking about, she was going on about them zippers too. She was happy about them zippers. Look, we got zippers even in the hood. Oh my God. Like, you know what I mean? They just shut her down. Dude came in, they're like, sorry, I'm out of breath. JFK's dead. You know what I mean? Like, but that's, it was wild, man. I thought that's really cool. All right. So now we're going to get into the man behind the gun. We're going to get into Lee Harvey Oswald. And then later we're going to talk about whether or not he acted alone. Like I said, the magic bullet. Don't forget that bullet is in Governor Connally's thigh. That's kind of important. So our man Lee Harvey, so we're going to call him LHO, right? Born in 1939. He was a former U.S. Marine, served in Japan and the Philippines, but had been a big communist supporter since at least the age of 14. This guy loved Karl Marx. He accidentally shot himself in the elbow while in the Marines. He was court-martialed twice, and demoted. He was discharged. He received what's called a dependency discharge after claiming his mother was disabled. traveled around after that for a little while. He sailed from New Orleans to France and then traveled to Finland, where he was issued a Soviet visa. This is kind of important. I think this is something that I feel like, and it goes in so well for my own conspiracy theory. It also, in addition to the fact of the series that we're doing right now with the podcast from the 40s to the 70s, I think this is why I wasn't so sure the CIA killed JFK. I think that the Russians killed JFK because of what I'm about to tell you right now. So like I said, he picked up a Soviet visa in Finland, which I think we mentioned before, and I didn't know that even Finland at one point was part of the USSR. I didn't know that. They were very far-reaching. But yeah, he defected to the Soviet Union, and he lived there for 3 years. This isn't like, I mean, it's not dissimilar from going to Russia right now, but it's like if you went to Russia in the 60s, bro, like you're a communist, man. Like you are a straight up USSR, property. So the fact that he lived there for 3 years and worked there and married, he had a kid, he met a woman named Marina Prusakova, right? He had a kid with her in 61, but in 62 he came back to the U.S. Back in the U.S., just back in the U.S., not in the U.S., yeah, right? But he settled in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where he socialized with Russian people. And actually, I listened to some interviews about that time. They just weren't that interesting, honestly. The guy that was telling it, I thought was a little too into himself. Like he referred to himself as like, oh, I was really handsome back in the day. Like what, dude? No one even asked that. It had nothing to do with the story. At that point, I discredited everything he else said. Like no one asked you what you look like in 1960. Bro. Like you didn't have to. Like I see what you look like now, so I feel like I know why you mentioned it. But I'm just saying, like you didn't have to bring it up. But yeah, so I mean, that's just a quick, about Lee Harvey Oswald. The question is, was it just Lee Harvey Oswald? I mean, the Warren Commission attributed this assassination attempt to Oswald and Oswald alone. And we're going to get into these conspiracies. Let me jump down because the question and why I mentioned Governor Connolly's thigh is because we need to know, we need to see inside, we need to see that bullet to know if it came from the same gun. We don't know. The world literally does not know because he died with that bullet in his leg and his family wouldn't allow it to be recovered. And you wonder, was it his family or was it like some CIA guy right behind their family being like, don't do it, don't do that, yada yada yada. Like why wouldn't you? Like why wouldn't you just? I mean, I guess you could argue maybe they don't care, whatever. I don't know. I think that's just it's a little bit. That's what I mean. That's what I mean when I was saying earlier about just everything is just too ripe for conspiracy. Like I don't think things happen like this in this order and stuff. If like. I don't know, like if some of this is not somewhat true, like I mean, I've listened to entirely too much about this, and I mean, just little inside baseball. I mean, but if you've watched what even RFK Jr. right is saying right now, I mean, he's on the campaign trail, but this guy is also saying that he thinks the CIA killed his uncle. RFK Jr., of course, father of Robert Kennedy, who was assassinated, I think, 5 years later, and he was also probably, I think, maybe the smartest Kennedy. Was RFK, was in my opinion. We're going to cover him too. We're going to get down there. We're going to get into the late 60s. We are just getting into the 60s right now, guys, in our 40s to 70s series. But yeah, he thought, and I mean, I think I don't know if I have the link, but definitely check it out on the website. The work site is going to be crazy on this one, guys, because I was just watching video after video. You should definitely go check it out. All the audio you're hearing here is going to be on the website. The videos actual of it to check it out if you want to, like the full in its entirety. I just kind of cut these down, and of course to make them fit my points, of course. But yeah, like RFK definitely thought that the CIA did this. So yeah, we're gonna pick it back up where we at. I don't know if there's much else to say about the day itself. As we've already said, LBJ gets sworn in on the plane on AF-1. And they want him to get out of Dallas, obviously, because they don't know what's going on. They don't know if this is part of a larger thing. They have no idea. But yeah, so they dip out with JFK's body. There was a big thing though, and this was it makes you this is interesting. Is that in Texas, they have a law that said that you couldn't move a body across state lines after it had been killed unless it had an autopsy, right? And so because JFK was killed in Texas, and so the Texas officials of the health department were not willing. They didn't want to let the president leave the state, even though federally they were like, we've got to get everybody here out because they are killing us, right? And so they almost broke out into a fist fight, but eventually they kind of relented because it's like, yo, this is the president. G, relax. Like, maybe you could like look the other way this time or something. But so yeah, then they get out. That's pretty much the end. The rest is, you can find out what happened. I wanted to really run down the day before we get into the actual like ridiculousness of what may or may not have happened. I think I will run through the Warren Commission really fast, and then we're going to get to the conspiracy theories, guys. We're going to get to the juice. It's dripping. So the Warren Commission, formerly President's Commission on the Assassination of President John F. Kennedy Commission. Warren Commission sounds better. It was a commission appointed by LBJ on November 29th, 1963, to investigate the circumstances surrounding the assassination of his predecessor, JFK. They both have cool acronyms. I want one. Mine's RJD. It's not cool. It's not LBJ. It's not JFK. Do I have to get killed to be a president to get one of those? I don't know. He made the Warren Commission to find out who shot his boy. But if you know the history, they weren't really boys. The chairman of the commission was Chief Justice at the time, Earl Warren. That's where we get the name from. The other members were 2 U.S. Senators, Richard B. Russell of Georgia and John Sherman Cooper of Kentucky. Solid name there, John. Solid name. 2 members of the U.S. House of Representatives, Hale Boggs. That's an odd one. And Gerald Ford of Michigan. And 2 private citizens, 2 randos, right? Alan W. Dulles, doesn't sound so random. Former director of the CIA, and John J. McCloy, former president of the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. I take back what I said about randos. From December the 5th, 1963, that's when they started. It met up until September 24th, 1964. That's when they submitted the findings to the president, LBJ, and the commission took the testimony of more than 550 witnesses and received more than 3,000 reports from the FBI and Secret Service. It was aided by 10 major departments of the federal government, 14 independent agencies, and 4 congressional committees, right? The commission's report was 888 pages, and it was immediately released to the public. Of course, before it was submitted to LBJ and then submitted to the public, but they brought it straight to the masses pretty quickly. And so the commission they concluded that the bullets that killed JFK were fired by Oswald from a rifle pointed out a 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository, pretty much putting a kaputs on any ideas that there was anybody else, definitely not the CIA, that was involved. All right, we did it. We covered the main stuff. Now, let's get to the conspiracies. So John Connally, the governor of Texas, right? He died on May 17th, 1993 of pulmonary fibrosis at the age of 76. When he died, forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht and the Assassination Archives and Research Center petitioned the Attorney General Janet Reno to recover the remaining bullet fragments from Connally's body, contending that the fragments would disprove the Warren Commission's single bullet, single gunman conclusion. That's why I said earlier it's important. The Justice Department replied that, quote, they would have no legal authority to recover the fragments unless Connally's family gave permission, end quote. Connally's family refused permission. Now, why did they do that? You just have to, I don't know. Why? His funeral was held on June the 17th, 1993, and that bullet was laid to rest. Now, his wife died 13 years later, in 2006. 13 years later. And they are interred together at the Texas State Cemetery in Austin. So I guess what I'm saying is the answer is at the Texas State Cemetery in Austin. I mean, it's wild. I mean, we're all doing all this, and it's just there. So like nobody else in their family is the JFK conspiracy theory guy. No, like not one brother-in-law that can convince somebody with some power to go just a little diggy dig, just dig dug. down in there, find out what's going on. But yeah, so that's one that doesn't even sound like a conspiracy. It's just we need to know if that bullet, it came from the same gun. What if it didn't? Can you imagine if it didn't actually come from the same gun? Another conspiracy, of course, is the three tramps. These guys, three guys, they are called the three tramps. They were photographed by several Dallas area newspapers under police escort near the Texas School Book Depository. Was just I always thought that was such an odd thing, that because like I live in Richmond, Virginia, and I don't think we have a Virginia school book deposit. I mean, like, what is that? Like, I don't. But so these tramps, they were photographed with the cops basically being in police custody around there. So everybody's like, oh, they must have something to do with it, because they were photographed basically right after the assassination. Since the mid-1960s, various allegations have been made about the identities of the men. They even thought that they were some of the White House plumbers. Now, if you know, we covered the Watergate about 5 or 6 episodes ago, and so if you've listened to that, then you know about the White House plumbers. They were the guys who basically did Watergate. They thought some of these guys were them, because of course, like we said, the White House plumbers had been have been in action for years prior to Watergate. That was one of the last things they actually did, was Watergate, and they messed it up. But yeah, so nobody really knew who they were. They were later identified, at least by the Dallas PD, as Gus Abrams, Harold Doyle, and John Gedney. Now, I wonder if those are even their real names, right? I mean, I don't know. The Dallas Morning News, the Dallas Times Herald, and the Fort Worth Star Telegram photographed 3 transients under police escort near the Texas School Book Depository shortly after the assassination. That's what made them so, that's really all it is. But it's I could see myself latching onto that too. I mean, you would think, it makes you wonder, what were they doing? And then we never got an answer. That's the thing. We never got an answer what they were doing. So could they be involved? Yes. Are they involved? I think also yes, but we don't have an answer. And so after Oswald shoots the president, right, he leaves the school book depository and tries to escape, basically. And people are now on the lookout for somebody. They don't know who they're looking for. They're looking for somebody. They have a vague description of who they've seen running from the school book depository. And so this guy, Oswald, he gets confronted by a police officer named Tibbetts, and Oswald kills Tibbetts as well. I think it's something that gets forgotten. Like I said before, when I think about the JFK assassination, I think about JFK getting shot. That's all I think about. You think about his head getting blown off, and on the back of that convertible, and Jackie O and all that good stuff, and the CIA and all this, but you forget that another man was killed and another man was almost killed. Like this was actually a fairly gruesome attack. It wasn't just as cut and dry as just plain old assassination. But I actually have here, we're going to go to this guy for a couple bits of audio. Is the man, this is who we're about to hear right now, is the man who was holding Lee Harvey Oswald when he was shot by Jack Ruby. And this guy has a crazy story. I mean, it's crazy in the sense of you just don't believe how much history your life is going to have in it when you wake up in the morning, I guess. Like, this guy was the guy who was holding Jack Ruby when he was assassinated. He was also in Pearl Harbor. Like, he was in the Navy, and he was in Pearl Harbor on a naval ship on December 7th, 1941. So when you look at this, or when you hear this is a man who's just, I mean, the amount of history I can't even fathom. But he's going to explain kind of what happened between Lee Harvey Oswald and Officer Tibbetts.
Tibbetts had called him over to the car door, and he leaned in and talked to him, they said, for a few seconds, and then Tibbetts got out and started walking around the front of the car to get to him, and Oswald stepped back 2 or 3 feet, and when Tibbetts got to the left front fender of the car, Oswald pulled out his pistol and went into that Marine stance that he'd been taught, and then just bang, 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 bang 4 times, just like that. He didn't move his gun up and down, he had left it steady. And so the first shot that hit Tippett was low along the belt area, and the next one a little higher. And what caused it? What he did is he went forward with the first shot, and he started turning to his left, and the bullet walked on up his body as he fell.
And the point I think that this officer's trying to make when he's kind of going back and explaining what happened between Tibbets and Oswald is that Oswald was so, and, kind of this thing like in your head, you think everyone already knows or thinks the same thing that you think. You think that he thought that when that officer pulled him over, maybe not pulled him over, because basically like Oswald was walking down the street, Tibbets was driving down the street slowly, had seen him and kind of gestured and talked to him through the window of the car before all this happened, and then stopped the car and got out, right? But while this is happening, Oswald is thinking, oh gosh, he knows I just shot the president. Like, I'm going to go to jail. Like, he's going to apprehend me right now. When in reality, the guy did not know what the assassin looked like, right? He didn't even think, like, oh, this is the guy. He was just, like, doing a search and, like, let me see if this is the guy maybe. So, like, there's a pretty good chance if Oswald had just played it cool, this is what the officer's saying, the guy would have just, gone on about his business. But that's not what happened. He would end up killing Tibbets, like I said, and then he would actually end up running. He would go from there to a shoe store to try to just fake like he's looking at shoes. I'm definitely not on the run for a couple murders right now. I'm just in the mood for a cross trainer of some sort. But the clerk sees him and sees that this guy's really not really looking for shoes. He doesn't look like he's that interested in the shoes. And then he leaves. The guy leaves or Oswald leaves and goes up the street. And so the clerk in the shoe store follows him because he's like, this dude's acting weird. I don't like this. This is weird. And I guess they know about what's happening because, as you would expect, it's everywhere. It's on every radio and television. Like the Dallas is just a buzz right now with like stuff is just pulsing. And he sees Oswald just instead of paying for he sees him walk by a movie theater instead of paying for a ticket, he just goes in the theater. And at that point, he's like, okay, this dude's weirdness, the actions are just they keep adding up to more weird. So he tells the clerk, or not the clerk, I guess the movie theater ticket guy. I don't know why he doesn't just do it himself. But he tells the kid at the movie theater to call the cops because this is the guy who probably just shot the officer up the street. Which is an interesting distinction that is made in this video that I was watching. Is that the guy says basically when Oswald was apprehended and taken in, because what would happen is the police, the Dallas PD, would end up swarming the movie theater, right, and getting him to come out. They ended up beating him up too. Which is if you look at the pictures, and there'll be some on the website. I was wondering when I was looking at it, because we see when he's being transported, in the Dallas, before he gets murdered by Jack Ruby, he's got black eyes, his face, it looks like he's been in a fight. You know what I mean? And you realize that's what happened. They were beating him down in that movie theater before they brought him in because he just killed one of their own. So the cops are mad even before the country is mad. Like I said, he gets brought in because he killed a cop, not because he killed JFK. Then they find out that he was the one who did that too. And that's going to bring us to one of the odder, more, or is it beaver? Is it otter or is it beaver? No, more weird things that I think, like I was saying earlier, that this entire scenario doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. As the kids say, make it make sense. The way that they drew it up, it doesn't make sense. Or just the way things keep unfolding, right? Okay, so we have this guy, Lee Harvey Oswald. He just killed the president, right, of America. He also killed a Dallas police officer. Maybe even also killed the governor of Texas. He's at this moment, the governor of Texas is fighting for his life. We don't know that he'll live for another 40 years and die of like cancer or something in the 90s. We don't know that. But in the moment, it's touch and go, right? Done all this, then he's getting transported in the basement of the Dallas Police Department, right? In front of everybody, bunch of people. There's cameras. I'm going to play for you in a second the audio of his actual murder. He gets murdered. The guy who does the murdering gets murdered himself. And it only gets weirder from there.
There is Lee Oswald. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot. There's the man with a gun. It's absolute panic here in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters. The detectives have their guns drawn. Oswald has been shot. There is no question about it. Oswald has been shot.
And I mean, as you can hear, it's chaos. I mean, it's wild. I mean, literally, the video, I think, will be on the works cited on the website. He just jumps out into the crowd or out in front of their basically, I guess, the procession, and just shoots him. He shoots him once. And I think the reason is because of that. I think he tried, but the guy who we just heard, who was talking, who was transporting Oswald, was actually doing a pretty good job to try to protect him. Like he said, he even got a hand on the gun at one point, which is why he was only able to get off one shot. But it's wild. And then, of course, okay, so now we just keep passing this buck of just oddities to now Jack Ruby. JFK's dead, right? Lee Harvey Oswald, dead. We're going to get to Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby Now, this is the part that's going to make it seem like this is the part to me that is unequivocally, we can't argue that this probably happened this way. Is once he gets apprehended, he gets put in jail. He ends up going to court, gets convicted of murder, right? Put on death row, but his conviction gets overturned. Now, even before this, there have been talks about, his mental capacities, his intellectual capacity. How much is this guy all there? And there's a psychiatrist who was trying to get on the case to be this man's psychiatrist. All right, that guy's name is Jolin West. I think he has another name, like a first name. I think Jolin is his middle name. I don't know why he chose to go by that because it's not that good of a name. Jolyn West. Right? Why this man is important, Mr. West? Why he is so important is he's one of the main people on the foundation, the bedrock of CIA's MK Ultra experiments, which nobody knew was even happening at that time, but they were. In retrospect, is your best friend in this case because we all know that now. We can look back; it's been found out. He was literally still running MK Ultra as he is trying to be the psychiatrist for the man who shot the assassin of the president. Just rewind what I just said right there. Play it back slow. There's a lot to unpack here. And this is what I mean about the conspiracies. This is it sounds crazy because we've been fed what I would consider to be a lie for 60 years. But when you look at it, so I was in the middle of telling my story. We go back to that point, basically. So what? He gets found guilty, right? Convicted, murder, death row, all that good stuff. Then his case gets turned over on appeal because they say his confession was not entered into court correctly. Basically, the evidence that is the fact that he's saying that he did it was not done right, so that they declared to have a new trial. So that's what happens. He goes back to the lower court to be reheard again. In this time, Dr. West finally gets on the case. He finally is able to become Jack Ruby's psychiatrist. And it's important that up until this point, nobody had thought that Jack Ruby was insane in any capacity whatsoever. He was a regular person. He was a criminal. He was said to kind of control the Dallas nightlife, if you will. He owned nightclubs. He was said to work with the mafia in some cases, but he wasn't crazy, right? He wasn't insane. But after one meeting, one interaction with Dr. West, when Dr. West came to the jail and saw him, and they had their consultation, nobody else was in there, and no cameras were in there. The only two people that were in there was Dr. West and Jack Ruby. West comes out of that cell and then says, "This man's crazy." Bunch of quotes. He starts talking about Jewish people killing other something, daughters being murdered. Like, it's different. No one has someone didn't have any legs. It was a lot, right? But he was hiding under the table, losing his mind, right? And then that's how he died. Not like that day, but that he would die in the same state of mind. He never came back to, he never found his way back to lucidity, if you will. He'd even been interviewed by other doctors. Like, once that happened, some of the other doctors that had seen him before West came in, went and interviewed him again and said, okay, there's been a market change in his behavior, right? He is obviously doing the stuff that West said he's doing, but it's impossible for this to have happened unless there was some sort of subversive behavior, which is impossible because he's been locked up, right? He's in jail. The authorities have him. This would only be possible if that was not the case. It's kind of what the doctor who had seen him on both sides of the, spectrum, was what he said. But this doctor was unaware that the CIA has been working on mind control techniques for 15 years. And the doctor that's responsible for it just is the one who saw him in jail. Dr. West is one of the main psychiatrists, and we're going to cover this. So if you're not getting it right now, the next episode should be, if not one after that, we're going to talk about the CIA and MK Ultra and all that good stuff, and it will further prove these points. But the same psychiatrist is the same one whose entire focus is to induce insanity, but also being unaware in the person that the insanity is being induced in. Meaning he's trying to make you crazy without you even knowing that he's making you crazy. That was what he worked on for 20 years and had some version of success, some modicum of success doing so. This is the same man who walked into that jail cell and made Jack Ruby go crazy. Now the question is why, right? The question is why? What, why? I don't get it, but I do at the same time. It makes so much sense as to, this is it just makes sense as the CIA did kill JFK. Now the question is, why did they do that? I don't know, and we may never find that answer out. I'm sure you could speculate till you're blue in the face. But I do think, to me, because I've never, and this was the smoking gun to me, and there's plenty of videos and stuff you can find online and all that stuff. But this made so much sense to me that, like I said, it's unequivocal. You can't, because it's documented. It's documented in the sense of not even like all of the crazy mind, control stuff, but what's documented, it is specifically that this man, Dr. West, was one of the main psychiatrists in what was a CIA mind control experiment, and he was also the psychiatrist for the man who killed Lee Harvey Oswald, and then he would also go down as being basically insane. So the rest of it is gray, right? So you draw your own conclusions. But what I can say, what we can both say for sure, is that those things are true, and that is odd. All right, that was JFK's assassination, and everything that came afterwards. Learned a lot. I have learned so much in the last few couple weeks talking about John F. Kennedy Jr. And I think I have come to the conclusion. I think the CIA definitely is involved, right? They definitely had a hand in it. Would love to know what their main focus, what their main goal was to assassinate a sitting U.S. president that was beloved by so many. He wasn't even. I mean, some people didn't like him. That's true. But it wasn't. I feel like there have been more polarizing presidents that have not succumbed to the same fate, if you will. But yeah, still in our 40s to 70s series here. We are now pretty much in the 60s, I think. I think we're done with the 50s. We're going to go back for a couple things that we talk about going forward. While their main components will be in the 60s, they may have had earlier, like precursors and stuff that maybe started in the 40s and the 50s. Like I said, we're going to talk about the CIA here pretty soon, and they go back to at least the 40s. Really enjoying it. Really think we're digging into some things here. I mean, I think this is why I continue to do the pod. It's interesting to me. All this stuff is legitimately interesting to me. Just re-upped on another year for the website, so we're gonna kind of try to get that even better than what it's been the last year. I mean, I think the big thing for this pod itself was just to have a website, and so now we've had a website for a year, and now let's have a good website for a year. So we're gonna see what happens with that. Still keeping the bite-sized bios coming every other Monday at 4:30 a.m. Of course, and the HTTH comes on those other Mondays. Appreciate you guys coming back every week for press and play. Definitely. I don't know if there's much else to say before we get out of here. I think I will, but before we get out of here, what will play you guys off is what I think is one of the more how can I put it? Well, I'll just say it's Walter Cronkite when he's telling the world that JFK has been assassinated, which I think is just, we talked about the idea of what's going to be maybe the top 10 most important moments of the 20th century that we're going to try to cover maybe in our next series. This may not be it, but this is kind of what I'm talking about. This moment, similar to what I played with the girl with the zippers and the dude who was out of breath, but like this is the one that I feel like is what people, what most people saw, what set the tone for America's reaction to JFK's assassination. So, as always, give us 5 stars if you liked it, 2 stars if you didn't. Tell us why you didn't like it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. I thank you guys for pressing play every week. But yeah, here's Walter Cronkite giving the world some bad news. Have a good week.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
Hello, Saver. Whether you're saving for that trip to the tropics or saving for an emergency, now is the time to take advantage of Wells Fargo's savings options. Wells Fargo offers savings accounts that can help you save towards your goals. So, what are you saving for? Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/save to open a savings account today.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.